So I made a little bit of a polemic attacking the progressive left, in my opinion, and I would again emphasize that caveat, in my opinion. Okay, I'm not demanding anyone agree with me or anything like that. I'm simply expressing my viewpoint. Um, in the interest of fairness and also in the interest of consistency, because I identify broadly with the center, and I say broadly because there is no single center school of thought that's perhaps worthy of another video itself. Um, but I'm critical of left and right in roughly equal measures, depending on the particular issue. Um, so I made that video about the left. I'm just taking a few notes here actually because I want to include as much as possible in the time frame. Um, there are actually areas where I think there is such a thing as regressive right. And I'm going to address some of those now. That's less of a term in usage. I mean, um, regressive left is something that's kind of being coined more by actually centre left people like Majid Nawaz, among others. But I think there is such a thing as regressive right as well, in contrast to the reasonable right and reasonable conservatives. Um, At the time of the Great Recession, a little bit of personal history here, I was very, very critical of the Conservative Party. I still am in many ways. I think the big society was a big scam. Um, I think that at the core, the Tories don't have the most vulnerable in society at heart. I do believe that. That doesn't mean I'm, red flag flying socialist. I'm not, but I don't believe that at their heart the Tories really genuinely care about the homeless, for example. As I'm not saying that they're totally callous about it, but I just don't believe that the Tories at their heart have the most vulnerable people in society. That's my gut feeling. And I'm sure there'll be people who will say, oh, that's not fair, etc. Now, another caveat I want to make, though, in no way am I generalizing all conservatives, okay? In no way am I saying all conservatives are like this, all right leaning people are like this, okay? Just like the video I made about the regressive left, I'm not talking about everyone. So if you're a conservative, if you're centre right and you're getting really offended by this, okay, I'm probably not talking about you. So I would ask people to be open minded, and even if you don't agree with me, at least don't sort of say, represent this video as something it's not. Okay, so let me just get straight into it before my time format runs out, my time limit. I think a lot of conservatives do have some conservatives have a mindset of one size fits all. What I mean by that is, I've noticed a lot of right leaning people kind of have this attitude, oh, well, if I could do it, so can you. And this person has no excuses. I think that for all the talk about freedom, a lot of conservatives don't really consider individuality. So there's this mentality of, yeah, if I could do it, so can you. And I've seen this from right wing people. They're a little bit blowhard about it. And, these attacks on snowflakes, as they would put it, I personally don't really like the term. Um, Sometimes it's a case of not appreciating that some people are sensitive. Now, I don't like political correctness. I'm not talking about language policing or anything like that. But just because someone is sensitive about something doesn't necessarily mean that they're overly PC. It might just be that they're sensitive about that issue. And if we're being honest, if you push someone, most people will be sensitive about at least one issue. I don't think there's many people that, hand on heart, can say there is absolutely nothing that they feel strongly about and they might be sensitive about. So the one size fits all mentality is something I don't like because people are different. I think some conservatives do have, they're bigoted towards people who are struggling because they kind of vindicate, for example, the Tory party line on things like unemployment. So their rationale is, oh, well, the unemployed are lazy, they're in the UK, they're lazy dole scroungers, so that justifies the government's hardline approach. And many conservative voters, in fact, would believe everything the Daily Mail tells them, and they would think that it's all a big picnic. So that lack of empathy and that prejudice towards unemployed people, to put it bluntly, pisses me off because I've been there. I know what it's like. I know the anxiety that brings. I've been through the DWP and it is no picnic. So I do wish certain right leaning people would at least try to understand. They don't have to agree with everything I'm saying, but just try to understand that it is not a picnic. And it's all very well saying, oh, if you just do this, if you just do that, when you get, I don't want to get into a big thing here on this particular subject, but because I've made other videos about it, but when you get rejected time and time again, when you've been messed around by unscrupulous bosses, it does sap your energy, it does sap your morale. So I think that's an area where they just don't really have empathy. Again, another one here would be migrants' attitudes towards migrants. Now, this one, I want to be very careful how I explain my stance on this and how I look at this. I'm not talking about people who have concerns about immigration, and I'm definitely not talking about people who insist on integration because I'm one of them. I agree with that. Um, and when you see, for example, migrant men doing things that are definitely not consistent with Western values, it's right that is criticized. It's right that we question the extent of integration that is happening, etc., etc. But I do see from some right wing circles a dehumanizing of migrants. An example of this, Katie Hopkins. When she called migrants cockroaches, I felt sick. I think it's understandable that people are angry about the political correctness around this. It's understandable that people feel anxious and concerned about some of the issues around mass immigration. But in the end of the day, we're still talking about human beings. And yes, there are good people and bad people in every group. I know asylum seekers who have, for example, an Iranian Christian friend of mine who says that some migrants are just not very, they're bad people, as he put it. They're outright Islamists, and they do not deserve to be in Western countries. So definitely there's going to be people like that. But some right wingers start to get into this mindset where they're all the same, and they start to generalize migrants and they start to look at them as, you get this particularly in the States, like um, aliens. And Western countries are going through a real situation with this. It's right that we insist on integration, it's right that we have control, but we cannot pander to the far right mentality of dehumanizing migrants. That's something I will never accept, and I think some of the tabloids have been borderline on that, quite frankly. Um, Another thing that's related to this, anti-PC. I share resentment at political correctness. I think very often there's no PC's got nothing to do with politeness. It's about controlling language. So I share right wing contentions about that. However, I think there are times when there are people who are playing bigots and racists who will kind of hide behind attacking PC. So they'll come out with a racist statement and they'll say, oh, this is the authoritarian left controlling what I say. Well, maybe it's just someone who's criticizing you for being an ass or being a racist. So, whilst I believe that racism is thrown around a lot nowadays, I think some right wing racists use that as an excuse to hide their racism or deflect from their blatant racism. If I see racism, I will condemn it, okay? And I think some right wing people are in denial that there is still a problem with racism. I mean, I've seen people defending Trump's blatant demagoguery and pandering to blood and soil nationalism. This is something I will never do, and I'm going to call racism racism. I'm also going to criticize that term being thrown around. So we need to be very clear what racism is. It's hatred or prejudice against someone because of the color of their skin or their ethnicity. That's what it is. And I think sometimes genuine racists. I mean, I've heard people say, "Oh, these Britain First patriots are just young lads who care about their country." No, they're thugs and hooligans, and a lot of them are racists. And I'm going to call a spade a spade. Um, I think too often right-leaning people make excuses for things like police brutality. Like there's this knee-jerk reaction of whenever the police get involved with something, oh well, the person wasn't complying. If they'd only complied, this wouldn't have happened. Sometimes that's true, but you get situations like the Eric Garner case, and incredibly, it's just been ruled that there will be no one will be charged with that. I don't like Black Lives Matter as a movement, but I can understand why it began. And I think too many right wing Americans in particular immediately get this knee jerk reaction, oh, well, they're wearing a uniform, so they must be right. And they don't even fathom the idea actually, police are human beings, and some of them are corrupt. Some of them do abuse their power. The same with the military, quite frankly. And this is kind of a right wing political correctness. When a soldier abuses his or her position, I believe they need to be held to account. If they abuse civilians, for example, that doesn't mean that's not being anti military. You could be pro military and recognize that most soldiers are brave people who put their lives on the line in a way that most of us wouldn't do. But you could still say, well, wait a second, these people are representing our country. And if we're going to lecture other countries about human rights, then we need to uphold standards. So, personally, I do think that anyone in uniform, whether a soldier or a police officer or anyone else, if they abuse their position, they need to face consequences. Some right wingers have this kind of knee jerk reaction of, oh, you're attacking the military or you're attacking the police. No, I'm just saying that corrupt people need to be held to account. They may be brave in other situations, but if they abuse a civilian, frankly, that is unacceptable. I mean, we're saying this now, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but those bikers that went out in force to defend Soldier F in the Bloody Sunday thing, I mean, what's their issue exactly? Is it the double standards, the fact that IRA terrorists haven't been, have been let off justice? If that's the issue, okay. But I think it's more just that a lot of people in this country have this blind mentality about the military that they can never be criticized. And I don't agree with that. I have huge respect for the military. I come from a military family, so I have huge respect for people who put their lives on the line. But I do not agree with the premise that soldiers can never be criticised, and a soldier who abuses his or her position shouldn't be held to account. I do not agree with that premise. I think it's a dangerous premise. I mean, we are meant to be a liberal democracy. We are meant to be setting the standard for human rights. And that brings me to my, I guess, last point. Well, there's two more points I'd like to cover. Human rights. There's a lot of conservatives who do speak out for human rights. Marco Rubio has been very vocal about human rights in Latin America, for example. Um, Jeremy Hunt has spoken out on the plight of Christians around the world. So there are conservatives who speak out for human rights. But I also think there's a lot of conservatives who think that human rights is a dirty word. And that's really unfortunate. And finally, the minimum wage. This is just kind of a personal one, but back in the late 90s, when the Blair government was bringing this in, conservatives warned, oh, it will destroy business. That never happened. The minimum wage is quite simply, I don't really understand how people could argue against it. Surely a happy employee is going to be a productive employee. Now, if you're against the minimum wage, I understand the argument for small businesses, but big corporations, no way. I mean, what's the alternative to the minimum wage? The alternative would be an employer could pay as little as they want, and that's plain exploitation. And I think too many conservatives are frankly okay with exploitation, or at least apathetic about it. And I have a big problem with that, such as the sort of things that go on in Amazon, which are a damn disgrace, and the Tories' shameful use of workfare, which is blatant exploitation. Anyway, I'll round this up. So hopefully I've been balanced if you're a conservative and you're getting worked up about this, check out my last video. I was just as vocal about the left, and that's what I try to do. I try to be consistent. Okay, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please feel free to subscribe, leave comments. I'm not going to get into running debates with people, but feel free to leave comments or agree with me, disagree with me. Just my opinion. Thanks for watching.